Well, hey there. It's so good to see you, Hidden Nation. Welcome into the studio. You got Josh Carey right here. It's your hidden entrepreneur. You know, this is the show where we bring innovators and trailblazers who are at the forefront of their industry. And we learn about the stories, their successes, their challenges, failures, and roadblocks, equally as important, so we can learn what they did, how they overcame it, so we can apply it too. Hidden Nation, we're joined today by a special friend, somebody that I've been connected with for some time now. I'm here with Maribel Lara, who is the Senior Vice President and Head of Consulting of the Sasha Group. Maribel, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me, Josh.
I love the idea of the Sasha Group, being connected to you for quite some time. I've been following the Sasha Group really from the beginning. And like any good business, I know that there's been an evolution, and I want to really get into that because I know the listener can really take comfort in, how many of us start something 1, 2, or 5 years later, we realize that it's no longer relevant, or I'm no longer passionate, or the need really for the market has sort of adjusted. And on your website, one of the first big headlines you see is "We create relevance to grow brands of all sizes." I love the word relevance. First, tell me what that word really implies.
Yeah, relevance is about mattering, right? Like something that is relevant to you matters to you. And the reality is this applies to every company that Gary works with, is the brands who will be here tomorrow, the brands who will be here years from now, is the brands that figure out how to matter to people.
How do we figure out how does one begin to figure out how to be relevant? How do you approach that with your clients?
It's about what you bring to the table, right? So I think that the biggest mistake we see in marketing today, in branding today, stems back from using the channels we have available, right? Because of modernization and digitization, the way that the old channels used to be used, right? Like the old channels were one-way communication. They were all megaphones of some kind. Radio talks at you, TV talks at you, newspaper ads, magazine, it's all at you, right? There's no conversation that happens. What digital did, what social media specifically did for marketing and communications was make two-way possible, was make a feedback loop possible. So what does it mean to be relevant? It means that you stop just freaking talking at people and telling them what they should believe about your brand, and you realize that you're going to get feedback on it in the digital space and that you should listen. And that actually the smart thing to do is, before you decide exactly what you're going to say and how you're going to say it, you actually start listening to the verbiage that people use, where they show up and how they show up in those places, and you adjust to be a fit for those like arenas, right? So being relevant in terms of your marketing and your branding is essentially saying, like, I do not know it all. We as a business do not know it all. We should actually listen, and we should do some reflecting, right? And we should take into account how this is going to be received best.
I know you're talking about an approach front and center for your clients, but it also applies, if I'm not mistaken, to the Sasha Group itself. How have you guys remained relevant and adjusted over the years?
Every year. We have revisited every single year. So we opened the doors to Sasha Group in January of 2019. So we're getting ready to celebrate a really nice milestone next January. But every year we've gotten together to say, okay, these are the things that we went into the year believing were true. What if this is still true? What have we learned? How would we change what we're going to do into this coming year? based on that, right? When we started Sasha in January of 2019, we had theses, we had, right, we had hypotheses of what we believed was needed. So I am going to make one correction to the intro. So Sasha is an agency, and Sasha does work with clients on a retainer basis. And then we also have a consulting arm at Sasha, which is what I lead, and we work with clients on a project basis. Some of those projects can be for our retainer clients, but it's typically for clients who aren't ready to work with us on a retainer capacity or don't want to work with us in a retainer capacity, so that we can still impact some levels of their job or their work. So when we started Sasha in 2019, we had a few theses. I'll focus on consulting. Our thesis around consulting was Gary is so big in the entrepreneur space, right? So you've got a lot of like early stage startups. They do not have the kind of budgets that merit hiring an agency on a retainer basis, but we can still impact them, right? Like strategy, which is where we can have the biggest impact, you don't revisit your strategy every day, right? Like we can set the strategy up for them and then set it up in such a way that it's almost like an instruction manual and hand it over to them for them to be able to execute themselves, right? And then what if we also created education offerings, right? Like we taught them how to do what we do, then they're even better set up to execute against the strategy that we developed for them, right? So it was really like, there are these entrepreneurs, these early stage businesses with like little to no team. We can still help them. And Gary's inbox is full of these people. That was what we knew existed. And so consulting at Sasha at that point was just like, how do we work with all these people that for years say to Gary, we want to work with you, but we don't actually have a way to work with them because VaynerMedia was really set up to work with Fortune 500 businesses.
I love the idea of revisiting every year. Hidden Nation, take note. If you're not already doing that, why not? Right? It's something so valuable, so necessary. Just see what you've accomplished, what you did, what worked, what didn't. Maribel, I'd love to hear, because you can't possibly be hitting a batting average of 1,000. Some hypotheses possibly don't work as expected. What's one of the main ones that still sticks with you today that didn't quite go as planned?
I think we have a few, right? Like, I would say one is I don't think that it was a failure, right? Because I think it was important. So we launched a few years ago, we launched advisory services, which was essentially like we would sell packages of hours where people could get on the phone with me, or a member of my team, or another expert at Sasha, and basically like ask us questions, right? Like get our brain time, right? So it was a way for them to extend their team. It was actually wildly successful in that people loved the idea of just being able to like get on the phone with us, show us their marketing plan, show us their campaign, and get our feedback on it. It was actually very, I think, impactful for the people that we did it with, but in terms of scalability for our team, business wise, right? Like there were other ways that I could spend my time that would generate greater revenue for the company. And so I actually think it's a product that worked, but it wasn't the right fit for what our revenue objectives for Sasha were holistically. So like I think that's an example of it's the right thing for these people. It's over delivering from what we hear from them, but I cannot take for granted that we have really robust business objectives as a holistic company. And I can take that time and put it into a project that is still going to be impactful, not necessarily in the same way, but is also going to meet the business objectives.
Wow. You also have on your website the idea of everything now is about social at the center. This is a relatively newer concept. Yes. What is this about?
Yeah, so this comes from the fact that like it's not that we don't like TV commercials, right? It's not that we don't like campaigns that you see, when you see a billboard in Times Square. It's shifting the model, right? Like the traditional agency model was come up with the TV commercial. And the way that the TV commercial was conceived was a bunch of people sitting around a conference table, right? Like the whole Mad Men model, sitting around a conference table, trying to figure out, like, they were determining what it is that people would love, right? And so they would come up with this big creative idea and spend a lot of money to come up with that creative idea. And then you would spend a lot more money producing that idea, right? Actually making the TV commercial. And then, I mean, as recent as like when I entered the advertising industry, right? Like social agencies, the way that we worked with bigger companies was just like, this is our big campaign. This is the TV commercial. This is how it's going to come together in out of home. And now you make the matching luggage of what it's going to look like in social. But it all stemmed from that big TV commercial. So social at the center is actually us saying that model is beyond broken, right? Because if we go back to what I said at the beginning, which is like the beauty of digital marketing, the beauty of social specifically is this two-way communication. Why are y'all sitting, why are 5 people sitting around a room determining what's going to work for everybody and what everybody's going to love? Why don't we actually start with social media content? Well, actually, why don't we start with listening to what people actually say about this thing? Why don't we start with listening to, you know, what music our target audience is listening to, like who's hot right now, what genre of music, what, you know, if we're in the fashion space, what are people talking about? What are the brands that they really like and why do they seem to gravitate towards? Okay, let's start with that. Now let me come up with some ideas in social that I could start to test out and see if these start doing well. And when things start popping, let me make more in that vein, in that spirit, and that keeps doing well. Eventually, I'm going to get to a big creative idea, whether that's an event or a billboard or a TV commercial, but it came from social. It came from actual people, not a few people sitting around a boardroom table. So that's really where that comes from. It's like we have this entire focus group available to us. We don't actually have to incentivize people to come to a focus group.
Wow. I love the concept of seeing social as a focus group. I never really hear that. You just sort of alluded to this, but I'd love to pull back the curtain a little further. If you will, can you go through a little bit of how you actually work with a client? And we'll use me in real time as an example. Yeah.
Yeah, we can do
So,
that.
so if I'm an ideal client and like I do, I run a podcast agency for podcast production and effective podcast guesting. So we help people like you firm up your message and get it out there on shows and create all the marketing for it. So I come to you and your team and I say, I'm in. Let's begin working together. What is that first process, that first session really like? What do we do?
Yeah, so actually the first we give you homework is the first thing we give you to do. So we have a bunch of questions that we've developed over the course of several years of doing this now. And so we call it's a deep dive, right? Like we have a bunch of questions that are going to actually get to the core of who you are, what you do, and why you do it, and who it is that you do it for, right? And we'll adjust those based on like the client, right? Because you got to like some folks have clients, some folks have consumers, right? So you got to adjust it. It's not here's the questionnaire. We send the same one to everybody. So we adjust it for the client. But the whole idea is the first thing we're doing is really trying to understand like your business, not just, yes, we're focused on marketing, but I need to understand your business. I need
In order to do that.
yeah, the who. Where we spend, so I can give you some examples of where we spend a lot of time, right? So one of the things I would ask you is, okay, I get it. I get what it is that you're trying to help these people with, but like, who are these people, right? Like, why is it that they're deciding that they want to even do a podcast? I would venture to guess that you've got like 3 or 4 core reasons that people fall into.
Sure.
That's why they're going to do it, right? And even then, if we took, okay, it's because they want to build a personal brand, but why? Right. And my guess, so these are my guesstimates, is that you've got folks who are ready to build a personal brand because maybe they own a business, but they're going to sell that business. And the personal brand actually gives them the footing to go on and do something else. And they actually get to take some of what, you know, they built, but like your personal brand, you hold on to, you take that with them, right? Maybe it's somebody who like wants to actually like build a legacy and sort of like leave some stories behind for
That's
their
right.
their future generations. And there are probably like several more reasons, right? So that's actually the key of what we try to get to, because that starts to get us to more relevant content, right? Like the other piece about relevance is like this one message for everybody. In a world where social media is now like dominated by these algorithms who pick and choose who sees what, those generic messages fall flat. They don't even get seen by anybody. You actually need to create poignant messaging. Like we exist in a world right now where so people see this big audience and they think that's better because I have the potential to reach 5 million people. Right. And it's just like, okay, sure, you have the potential to reach 5 million people, but good luck coming up with a poignant enough message that will get past these algorithms to even get in front of a fraction of those people. By not being more specific and more nuanced, you haven't given those algorithms enough to hook onto to identify the people who would actually connect with that. So we live in a world where, like, if I told you, Josh, you should be focused on people who are looking to pivot careers, right? And podcasting is going to be their avenue to do that because they can establish expertise in a new industry without having to work there by bringing in people for relevant conversations, like in that industry. Like they can build that expertise without needing 10 years of having worked in that, right? If I said to you, okay, that audience is 500,000 people, right? You weren't going to reach 500,000 people in that 5 million with a generic message, but you have the potential, right? Like of reaching close to all of those folks with messages that are really specific about where they're at, how they're feeling, what their specific challenges are.
Stunning. Right. So a couple of things, and then we'll continue on that path. If I'm not mistaken, it's also that a generic message to 5 million, let's say it did reach some or even most of them, the generic message is not going to convert them or inspire them to take any sort of action.
I'm actually saying it's not even going to get in front of them.
Right.
Organic,
Right.
it's not going to get in front of them.
That I understand.
And you could put paid media behind it to get it in front of people, but it's generic and that means it's bad.
Yeah.
So you're going to have wasted media dollars getting it in front of people.
So once we do that, and I love that. So we've established the what I do. Now you got into the heart. You've helped me. You've consulted and coached me through the why. And then we've identified the who. So now you have all of that information. What happens next?
Yeah, so what our core product, so the primary place we generally start with our clients is developing a strategy for them. So those groups, we call them cohorts, right? So in this strategy, what we're handing over to them is our recommendation on the cohorts they should focus on. So we'll actually give them, you know, a number of cohorts, but we'll say these are the 2 to 3 that we think you should focus on. We will give them a platform strategy. So we'll say to them, like, based on these people you're trying to meet, we think that these should be your primary platforms. And we think that this is what you should be doing on these platforms. That work also includes an audit. So if these are clients who already have a presence across social, we're actually going to dig into what they've already been doing and we're going to give them all sorts of recommendations. We'll give them hygiene recommendations, right? There's some like fundamental stuff that you should be taking advantage of in terms of like your profile description, how you've got things set up. So we'll give them hygiene recommendations. We'll give them stop, start, continue recommendations. So like this stuff you're doing, this is awesome. This is why it's awesome. Keep doing it. This is stuff that needs some work. Here's how we think you can tweak it. Like, here are the tweaks. And this is stuff that you should not be doing because it's a waste of time. It's not going to work for you. And then so that audit will be part of this, right? It's foundational to building the strategy. So they'll get cohorts, they'll get platform strategy. And then there's a lot of education that happens. So before we even hand over that playbook, we do a 3-hour workshop with our clients for if it's in person, because in person always takes longer. And that workshop is actually meant to be quite educational. So we're introducing folks to our philosophy of strategic organic creative, We're explaining like all the building blocks to it. We're teaching them how we get to creative ideas, because that's the education they're going to need to be able to execute on the strategy. So the education piece is actually built in to the deliverable. So we hand over this playbook. The other element that I think is really unique to what we do is we actually do a deep dive into like who's on this team, what are their skill sets. And so the playbook recommendation is actually based on what your team is and who does what. Here's who we think should meet these functions, because you're not set up the way that we are set up as an agency. And I don't expect you to.
Yeah.
Like we're an agency that functions a very specific way and does very specific things. Like you're a business that does more than just social media, creative, and I like you're also writing a newsletter, and you also do maybe you do conferences, and you need your marketing team to do some of this other stuff, right? You may be e-commerce based, and so there's a lot that goes into that. So we have to respect the fact that our clients' teams are set up differently and have responsibilities outside of what we're asking them to do. So the recommendations actually are tailored for that client's specific team and the skills they have in-house. And if we identify gaps, then we'll like raise our hand and be like, you right now don't have anyone that does this. And so as you grow and you're able to invest, like these are the roles we think you're going to need.
Wow. What I love about this, Maribel, is that as I'm listening personally, and I know the listener is doing the same, no matter what business or industry they're in, you just gave a fantastically generous and brilliant playbook and checklist that we can
Yeah.
look against for our own business and say, oh, okay, that's a great, I didn't think of that. This is so thank you for going through that. You are under the VaynerX umbrella, which I'm sure has some obvious advantages, but you still operate as a business that needs to reach revenue goals, and you have to sell your product and market yourself. How in the world do you approach differentiation? How do you specifically differentiate yourself from anyone else doing the same thing you're doing?
Look, I think that differentiation so much comes down to the people doing the work, right? So for me, differentiation really is about who you are and, like the face on these things, right? Like I don't say it from like an egotistical perspective, but I know that we're able to sell in a lot of what we sell in because of how I'm able to have conversations with clients about these offerings, right? Like I have the benefit of having worked for an entrepreneur CEO for 10 and a half years now. I understand how he looks at business, and that has helped me over the years understand like how my clients look at business and what their needs are. And so when I go into new business pitches, and this is how I train my team, right? Like we're not similar to us saying you can't use social or you shouldn't use social as a megaphone. A business meeting, right? Like a new business meeting, a meeting where you're introducing a client to your capabilities shouldn't always look the same. Yeah, I have a capabilities deck. It's rare that that's what I use for that phone call. I actually spend at least half of my time on a new business call with a client trying to understand them. And then the rest of it, like making sure that I am repeating back to them a clear, right? Like that I've captured what it is that they're looking for. And I'm trying to help them understand like where we can help them. Like what is the expertise I bring to the table, my team brings to the table specifically for them. And so, yeah, I think a huge part of it is the people. Differentiation really does come down to the people, right? Like differentiation comes down to the work, sure, but how does good work happen? Good work happens because you have good people, competent people, skilled people doing the work.
So, what does the listener take from that? What is the marching order there? What can they self evaluate for themselves?
I think people and culture, man, right? Like I have never forgotten that my first job interview for VaynerMedia, I fell in love with the company culture. And one of the things that I fell in love with was a phrase that has stuck with me. We're focused on happy employees. Happy employees do good work. Good work retains clients. Good, happy clients, right? Like Happy clients stay, they come back, right? At the end of the day, sure, the goal is like clients, because clients is how we make our money. But there was this real understanding that people were the way that we get there. And so I don't care what kind of business you're in, if the people that help you get that work done are not happy, you're not going to succeed.
Let's wrap up this final segment with the people of you. We were talking before air how you've been told and discovered in the past that it's not only about entrepreneurship, but you are also an intrapreneur. What is that? Identify that for us.
An entrepreneur is a person who builds and launches new things within an existing organization.
And you have a whole history.
I do.
Tell us about that journey.
So 2.5 years into my being at Vayner, I was at that point a VP of client partnerships. Is that right? Yes, it wasn't called client partnerships back then, but it's the equivalent of what our client partnerships team is now. Gary actually came to me with a unique opportunity. He said, I'm launching a new team. I'm calling it the Office of the CEO. It's going to be 4 people, and I want you to be part of it. And I was like, what is it? And he said, we're growing tremendously. We had doubled in size in the 2.5 years that I had been there. So we went from 350 to like 700. He said, I'm finding myself on defense. I need back on offense. But in order to be back in offense, I need people who can be me in the room when I can't be in the room. He's like, I'm a bottleneck right now. And so I need people who like can take it and like keep stuff moving forward, but understand like where it is that I want it to go. So I need 4 people that I trust to do that. And I was like, wow, that's pretty amazing. But yeah, like it was a role that didn't exist. There was no job description. Because if Gary is offering you the job, he just gave me the job description. And so we had to figure it out, right? Like the 4 of us had to figure it out. Thankfully, my 3 colleagues had all been working for Gary directly, and so they were able to help me figure out how to work with Gary. Really, that led to him building a more robust C-suite, which is what he needed, right, to scale himself. We were not that C-suite, right? But we helped bridge the gap until he had that C-suite established. And so a year in, he was like, okay, like, I think I'm going to dissolve the office of the CEO now. Like, what do you want to do next? And I was like, I want to work for you directly for at least another year, because it took me 6 months. So like, give me some more time. He's like, okay, tell me what you think that'll look like. It's like, okay. And so I created a role for myself. I created a title called VP of Special Projects. And the way that I pitched it to Gary was, and I said, given where you sit in business, there are always opportunities that are going to come your way that aren't a natural fit into what we've already got set up in the VaynerX system. And I said, you and I have had great success with you handing off some of those introductions or relationships to me and letting me figure out how it can fit or what else we might be able to do to evaluate that opportunity or make that opportunity come to fruition. And I was like, so I want to continue being that person. And he was just like, so like special ops in the military. I was like, exactly. And he was like, okay. And I knew that I had written a good job description because that week he brought me into several meetings and introduced me with that title. And I was like, it clicks. And so that became my role for a year. And some of the things that I caught were I got to work on this new consulting offering that we developed that became Vayner Mentors and then Sasha Mentors. I got to work on the 4Ds, which was our first educational offering. And then I got to work with some cool clients, nonprofit clients who wouldn't have been able to afford to work with VaynerMedia. Did some amazing work with Sandy Hook Promise at a time that they really needed it. Did some work with a new cultural organization that was launching in our new community at Hudson Yards, The Shed. They've been my clients since then, so I actually brought them with me to Sasha. And so I've mentioned Sasha a few times because then towards the end of that year as VP of Special Projects, it made a ton of sense when Gary decided to launch the Sasha Group, which was going to be focusing on like smaller clients, right, who couldn't yet be VaynerMedia clients. I got asked to come over and be head of consulting. And so we took mentors, and we actually also took the 4Ds, and we took some of these smaller clients that I was working with on my own, and all of them came over to Sasha. And so, yeah, part of the founding leadership team at Sasha have evolved our consulting offerings. Another way to be an entrepreneur is we didn't talk about this. I took a break this year. I was asked to go run the VaynerMedia Mexico City office because we had a sudden change in leadership, and we needed to bridge the gap until we found a permanent lead for the office. And so another way to be an entrepreneur is to like go and essentially like help out a team you've never worked with. So in a country you've never worked in and you're not from and you don't have any roots to. So I picked up in February of this year, and I moved my family to Mexico for 6 months, and I ran the VaynerMedia Mexico City office until we found a full-time person to come in and do it. And so that meant like needing to dive into every team and like roll up my sleeves and like get into the work and give feedback on like how we needed to get things on track. And so, I think, entrepreneurs, just like entrepreneurs, need to be comfortable in change, need to be comfortable on need to be able to have an impact really quickly because you don't always have a whole lot of time, you don't always have a whole lot of money. And so all of these different jobs that I've had in the Vayner world have given me the opportunity to learn a lot of things that are definitely part of entrepreneurship, even though I'm inside a company.
My goodness, Hidden Nation, if you are not connected to Maribel and this is your first exposure, I mean, come on, you see why I'm so excited to be connected with her for all these years. You are just a wealth of everything, Maribel. Thank you so much. Before we part, one last question. Let's say tomorrow you're able to speak directly to your ideal audience. What is the message you have for them?
The message I have for them is to be true to who they are. I think that advertising and marketing is only hard if you're trying to be something you're not. So be true to who you are. Don't lose sight of the why behind you're launching this thing, you're running this thing. And if that's a constant drumbeat for you and that's a constant drumbeat in your communication, it's going to connect better and you're going to find success.
There you go. Hidden Nation, follow the Sasha Group, follow Maribel Lara for all kinds of insights. I think you get it. And furthermore, like I alluded to and said throughout this episode, this is a playbook. There was a masterclass gems all throughout hidden here, what you can do, what your next steps need to do, what you can evaluate, especially going into the new year. Maribel, thank you kindly for being so generous. This was incredible.
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm always happy to do these. For you, Josh, for you.
Appreciate that. And I appreciate you, Hidden Nation. As always, the Hidden Entrepreneur is about putting your best foot forward, getting out there, being visible, be seen. I think that's been a supported theme throughout this dialogue. So go do it. As always, keep in touch. Let me know in the comments what resonates, what you're doing, what you're up to, how we can support. We're going to do something like this again before too long. Until we meet again, take care. Be well.